tell me about poetry. What's unique about poetry? How's it taught in your classes?
Well, I think it's interesting you asked that question today because I have a couple packets of poems, and and I do this at the college too. I don't assign a poetry book because they're expensive, and I try to save students money, and here to save them school money. There are a lot of magnificent poems in the public domain, so using these. So I talk about, although there are elements of prose and poetry that overlap, there are discernible differences. Now, poetry historically, and certainly I think not just in our civilization, but certainly in our civilization, going back to the time of the ancient Greeks, was linked to the divine. Now, it may have been pagan, but it was linked to the divine.
Yeah.
They saw this as like connecting with a deity. So there are two types.
Like the transcendental.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are two types of poems that stand out in the sense. One was called a paean. Now, paean, that is still a word in the English language, and means high praise or so on. These paeans were offered quite often by armies when they're drawn up on the field of battle. Both sides is in the same culture. That a Theban army and a Spartan army might be offering these paeans. This is a type of poetry to Apollo, asking him to help victory. Or when ships were setting sail, they'd say these paeans. There's another type of poem called a dithyramb, and the only time I've ever heard dithyramb spoken of is not in our language. It's just when you're talking about this form of poetry. It's a type of poetry of these festivals to Dionysus. So going back, there was this link that poetry is doing something different with the language. And we have that in the Middle Ages. There was a saying, music is the handmaiden of poetry. So with liturgical, texts, the music was just there to serve the poetry.
Okay, yeah.
So I just gave my students an assignment today. The other day they had to come in with picking a poem from the packets that they like, recite it, and then say something about it. Whatever, sparked them. And I was talking about how poetry does things like through repetition, through alliteration, through the cadence of the line, through the rhythm of the lines. It does something to us. It takes us to a somewhat different place. Now, you can have those elements in prose, too. Like first paragraph of like Nabokov's Lolita has a very poetic quality. That magnificent closing line of The Great Gatsby. That's like almost, it's a poetic type
what is
of.
It? I don't have that memory.
I just love this. I love that novel. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. I just got chills re-saying those words. I think it's just magnificent, and it captures something that's so true about such a great part of our lives. If there is a good part in your past, that yearning, that calling, I'd love to return to this. And so much of our life is maybe, with some people more, other people less, but an attempt to return to that. So it's hitting on something true, and it's put so well. So that you do have these poetic qualities in prose, but it's different.
Yeah.
So I told my students today, in the second part of the period, pick one of the poems from the packet. It can be the one you read the other day. It could be something else. And try to write it. Keep the basic information there, but write it in prose. Like you're converting it to a paragraph.
Sure. Something. Okay. Yeah.
And so I said, you don't have to finish this today, but Monday after break, read them and then talk about what's different. So
that sounds like a funny exercise.
Yeah.
And the paragraphs will sound pretty weird.
Well, yeah, and that's okay. I mean, that's so you asked me about teaching poetry. So this is not a creative writing class in poetry, which I have taught at OCC. I've taught it a couple of times over there. So I'm not getting into some of the more technical. Another excellent course I had at Syracuse, one of the non-woke courses, was by a professor whose lectures was called the the forms of poetry, and I think that was the name of it. No, the structure of poetry.
Okay.
And so we got down to very like low level stuff, like the sound of a line with the modulation of vowel sounds or consonants. I mean, we were looking at.
Yeah, you see, everything you're talking about is the reason I wasn't an English major in college. I was torn between English and philosophy, and then I realized, I think I just like the ideas in books, not whatever you're talking about.
Well, and I did both. I did,
Yeah. So you're more gifted, man.
Well, no, not necessarily. But these lectures were they're published. I think it's the 4th or 5th edition that of his work. But yeah, we got down to this very technical level, which you have to understand. You have to be thinking about what you're doing if you want to write, other than just I'm writing this for myself. But if you want other people to like wow, I like that. You get it's because it's a craft.
Yeah,
it's not just like I fell off the boat and now I can write the Odyssey. It's it's you work at it, and so I don't do that sort of thing. I might mention listen to the repetition, listen to the rhyme, all this. But what I try to get them to do is read it and sort of experience the sound and the rhythm of the poem.
Okay. Yeah.
And even people who say they don't like poetry will generally like doing this. If they get a poem that they like and they're reading,
or they like music, they just don't understand that.
Yeah.
Modern music is just the modern poetry we're producing today.
I mean, some more or less, but
I wanted to circle back to what you had said at the start, that like poetry for the Greeks had this notion of the divine. Do you know the Norse mythology of how poetry came into existence?
I must have come across it, but I can't read. No.
Okay, so like Odin, he either turns into an eagle or a raven, pick a bird, and he steals the poetry, which is in a vat from like a giant or something, and he goes, drinks up the poetry in this vat, and then he's flying back to Asgard, and he's gonna vomit up the poetry in Asgard so that Asgard and Midgard can now have poetry thanks to Odin's gift. So it's like it comes from the divine.
Yeah.
But while Odin is fleeing the giant, they like throw a rock or some missile at him that spooks him as he has to get out of the way, and because of that, he jolts, and some of the poetry comes out as excrement from his rear end. And that is where the bad poetry comes from. So then Odin, he regurgitates the rest of the poetry, and that's good poetry. And then whatever he had, flatulated, is what I'm capable of writing, according to the Norse.
I didn't know that. I love that. That's great. Oh, thank you.
Now you got a cool story you can tell next time you do
poetry.
Right. Yeah. So we recently had a poetry reading night, a Robbie Burns night. Can you explain what is a Robbie Burns night?
Well, Robert Burns, Robbie, Bobby, he calls by many different names. He was the national poet of Scotland. His birthday is January 25th. And so throughout the English-speaking world, there are these Burns societies. And they'll have these big dinners. They'll have a bagpiper and pipe in what's called the haggis, which is... I've never had it. Have you ever had?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
It can stay in Scotland.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like oatmeal and like the ground
beef
and everything, and the innards boiled in either a pig stomach or sheep stomach, I believe, and they have Scotch whiskey, which I think maybe helps get that down. And they have the dinners, and they recite Robert Burns's poetry. This is last night was our 4th annual Burns Night poetry reading here. It's a problem scheduling it. So we were originally going to do it last week, but luckily our boys team was in the playoffs, so it coincided, so we shifted it to last night. and there are, the societies, they try to get them as close to his birthday as possible. But it's a celebration of his poetry. Now, at Tyburn, we use that as the occasion for this, and we have some Burns's poetry, and some people wanted to read some of his poetry. We do always conclude the evening with the singing of a piece that almost everyone in this country knows, and very few people know that Robert Burns wrote it, but it's Auld Lang Syne. We sing a verse of Auld Lang Syne. And so, like, I brought, like, I read a few of my own poems. Then we had people, some adults on the faculty, some adults who I just invited out but were part of the Tyburn community, but they're not on staff or students. We had students who, one student read something she had written. Other students just had poems that they liked, and they read them. And we have some food. We don't have haggis, but we have some food, and it's just a fun evening. And a lot of the readers were very dramatic, and people were, just enjoying it and laughing and having a good time. But I said to them, I said, if you enjoyed yourself here, it's because even if you didn't, you couldn't explicitly describe why you reacted, but you reacted to these elements that, as you mentioned, are these eternal things of the world, that we respond to these things, and that's why you're enjoying it.
Cool. So why can you speak to why it's important to host these kinds of events?
Well, I think a couple reasons. One, it helps to bring people together in a community more, the community of Tyburn. Also, in days gone by, there used to be more of these cultural things in our world, and they are disappearing. And I think that's a sad thing. And I think it's the side that wants to destroy these things. They're happy to see these things being destroyed, and only state-sanctioned things like state schools or things like this, that this is where you go for your, ersatz culture. I think it's important to have these things.
Not even culture.
Right.
This is where you go for your multicultural.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it's good to have these things, and people like them. And I had people coming up to me afterwards wanting me to do more of these things at the school, and I'm very happy, to do more. So, we were just speaking about a half hour ago, possibly doing another reading, open poetry reading in the spring.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Jim Delaney, thanks for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
English 12 teacher and board member. So,
thank you, Connor.